Big weekend coming up, leading into a much bigger weekend the following weekend. And I want to start with this because I have a million places I want to go with you. I saw your tweet of earlier in the week, so let's revisit briefly. What was your reaction? How do you feel about the way the Big Ten handled themselves this week relative to Ohio State?
I think we foresaw it coming. Us that have been in the sport for a while, and listen, the Big Ten is going to act in the best interest of themselves, and the best interest of themselves is to get a team in the college football playoff and try to keep their brand relevant. So I think we knew it was coming. I do think it would be very interesting to see if the shoe was on the other foot. If Indiana was in that spot, would they do the same exact thing and treat Indiana, like they treat Ohio State? I think that would be interesting. We're not going to get the answer to that, but Ohio State, we can look at them and say they're the best team. Obviously, we'll get another good game against Northwestern, which will be a lot of fun to watch.
That's a week from Saturday. Northwestern will play against Illinois first tomorrow. And again, I will root like crazy, and I will give us a puncher's chance next week. But let us then move to the next issue here, which is if we do have, let's just for the sake of the discussion, say we have a 6-0 Big Ten champion Ohio State. How will that resume in your mind compare with the resume of a Notre Dame, should the Irish lose the rematch with Clemson next weekend, or even, unimaginably, the resume of Alabama, should Alabama lose the SEC championship game against Florida?
I think that's the crazy part. Is that's the scenario that would make my day really happy, because we do the selection show after championship Saturday, and if Alabama were to lose to Florida, okay, Florida's in. Winner of Clemson Notre Dame is obviously in. But if Clemson wins, Notre Dame has obviously already beat them. So now you got a case for both of those to be in, and you got Ohio State. So Florida's in. Say Clemson wins. Clemson's in. Now it's between Alabama, Notre Dame, and Ohio State for 3 spots.
For 2 slots. Those 3 teams, to be clear. Those 3 teams, the 3 biggest brand names in the sport, David, for 2 spots.
And Notre Dame has 10 wins because they played 10 games. They beat the number 1 team in the country at the time, Clemson. You got to look at that on the resume. Alabama, you're going to look at, they destroyed A&M, who's going to be in the top 5, who's not even in this conversation, by the way. We're talking, and we're kind of leaving them out because they have a chance to possibly join and jump too, and they beat them by 28. They beat Georgia by double digits. They probably been the most dominant team throughout the college football season. So in that case, to me, that's the only scenario where I think Ohio State could be in some trouble, or it could call into question the amount of games. And I know everybody's going to point to, I look at Ohio State and they're a really good football team. I don't disagree with that. Ohio State's a really good team. I'll say this. I think they look more human than they did last year. I think they have more flaws than they did a year ago. And if you remember 2 years ago, we thought the same thing about Ohio State. They looked great, and they lost by 29 to Iowa, or Purdue, excuse me. And then 3 years ago, they lost by almost 30 to Iowa. So you have to compile a resume. So I'd be okay if the committee said, listen, they've only played X amount of games. They haven't earned that right to go to the college football playoff. That, to me, is the scenario that makes everything amazing.
Greeny and David Pollack. Yes, so that would be the dream scenario for those of us who love the talk, because, again, Alabama, Ohio State, and Notre Dame are the 3 biggest brand names in the sport. Not the 3 best programs. Clemson certainly would be in that discussion, but as far as the brand names, those would be the 3 big ones. To get back to Texas A&M, it seems to me the scenario in which they become part of the conversation is if Notre Dame beats Clemson. If Notre Dame beats Clemson again, Clemson's out, Notre Dame's in. That's one. Alabama, let's just put Alabama in, or the SEC champion, let's say it's Alabama, they're in.
Alabama, yep.
Alabama's in. Ohio State, that way, probably gets in, and then is Texas A&M the 4th team?
I tell you what, when you look at Texas A&M, here's the part that's concerning. And I know Texas A&M fans get pissed off at me, but I don't really care. They haven't looked dominant. They are a ground and pound physical team, but they're not. I watched them last week. I watched them against LSU, and you just see they look really good, but they don't look great. They don't look special. They don't have that guy at the trigger that's pulling the trigger that is dynamic, that's going to go in there and beat one of these great teams. We've seen them against a really good team with Alabama, and we saw them get destroyed. We've seen them against Florida at home. I would argue too, Greeny, if that game wasn't at home with the crowd playing a factor, maybe they don't win. So I'm not as sold and not as convinced with A&M that they're going to get in the dance. I think they need a ton of help, just like, you know, any other teams like Washington or Iowa State that you're talking about out of the fray. They would need complete and total chaos.
So a quick final question for you, David. And again, we're looking forward to it this weekend and then especially next week. And your just opinion, you're an observer and you know as much about football as anybody I know, and you watch all of these games. Right now, in your opinion, who are the 4 best teams?
I would say Alabama is by far and away the best team.
Mm-hmm.
I would say Clemson's one of the best teams. I would say Notre Dame is one of the best teams. And I would say Ohio State is one of the best teams.
Thank you for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.